Good day. Terrence Walker with the Intero Consulting Partners here to present on It's as Easy as 1, 2, 3, migrating from HFM to FCC. Before we begin today's webcast, we first want to confirm the audio and the video components of today's webcast just to ensure that you can hear and see the content of today's webcast. Now that we have positive affirmation that you can see and hear, we will begin. When we think of migrating from HFM to FCC, many of our clients wonder, is there an easy button? Is there a one-click option for migrating from HFM to FCC? The quite simple answer is no, there isn't. But the thought is that you probably do not want to consider embarking upon that type of migration because this is the perfect opportunity to review, to revisit, to re-engineer those consolidation processes that exist within HFM before considering migrating those to FCC. In today's session, we'll cover two critical questions. We'll also discuss features, functionality, and some comparisons and review between HFM and FCC. That said, we'll ask why should you move from HFM to FCC? Why don't you want to click the button migration solution? And lastly, as I mentioned, we'll cover how to move from HFM to FCC. When we think of the on-premise world and some of the corresponding anxieties that exist within the on-premise world, there are a number. There may be varying levels of IT support, given the level of involvement and inclusion for supporting the actual applications. There may be differing issues regarding compatibility regarding the actual environment or the operating system in concert with the corresponding Oracle Hyperion application version. There might also be some questions regarding, will my application be supported, given that some of the latter releases, and not later, but latter releases, have actually run out of support from an Oracle perspective. If these are considerations or concerns or even headaches that you're experiencing, you should definitely consider migrating to financial consolidation and closed cloud. Also, from an HFM perspective, if HFM is performing in differing fashions than its core purpose-built definition, like performing budgeting and planning activities, maybe even using HFM for allocations, and maybe even the calculation of the tax provision, there are purpose-built applications in Oracle's EPM Cloud that might be a much better fashion for actually performing these activities. So again, this will be a definite consideration to consider, not simply migrating to FCC, but also considering migrating these differing HFM activities to purpose-built EPM Cloud business processes. That said, speaking to Oracle EPM Cloud Enterprise Edition's business processes, there are a number, including planning, consolidations, tax reporting, profitability and cost management, reconciliations, enterprise data management, and narrative reporting, just to name a few. But in today's session, we will focus primarily on the consolidations process, or more specifically, FCC. When we think about the cloud and the pivot to the cloud, there are a number of benefits that our clients quite often receive. In that we're talking about the actual cost of ownership, we find that the cost of ownership for applications as we pivot to the cloud becomes a much less expensive endeavor. Would it be from reducing our IT cost for supporting these applications, having to address differing versions or expansion of applications, as well as a corresponding on-prem maintenance or yearly maintenance agreements that are relative to those applications, as well as the concerns regarding server maintenance and maybe even expansions or upgrades and the corresponding costs that's associated with managing those applications on-prem. Okay, simply from a cloud perspective, the cloud has simply won over a number of our clients and even made some of our prospective clients rethink their on-prem footprint, and that they do want to get out of the business of managing data centers, having to manage software version updates, or migrations to later releases of the applications, as well as installing software, what have you. So again, these are all benefits that our customers have experienced when actually pivoting to the cloud to carve out these specific areas of focus, and for those who are cost focused, being able to have a much more cost centric reporting platform in the EPM cloud. Well, next transition is speaking to why should you move to financial consolidation and close. In one of our more recent Oracle partner training sessions, whenever Rich Wilkie speaks, I'm actually really vexed by some of the things that he offers for us, how the FCC application has evolved over the years. This is probably the most profound actual slide that I'm actually going to repurpose from that training that speaks volumes to where FCC is versus where it was from an initial release perspective. And that will note that over a span of 3 to 4 years, this application has evolved quite a bit. And that from its initial release in May of 2016 through its achievement of parity in late 2018, literally almost all HFM feature functionality definitions have been ported into the EPM cloud, or more specifically, FCC. And since late 2018, the actual focus, or the continual focus, has been on continued application improvements, or from a performance perspective, as well as getting more optimal consolidation times, which has been the greatest focus for the greater breadth of our HFM migrations to the consolidations application, or FCC. And also, they've also been focusing on some new feature and functionality definitions, in that the roadmap for FCC is very, very robust, in that, again, as we achieve parity back in 2018, not recently, back in late 2018, the focus is also transitioned to adding new features and functionalities with this application as well. When we speak to the core features of FCC, there are quite a few. One of the most prevalent for those environments that include multiple EPM applications is quite simply that it has a common EPM platform, in that the look and feel of the consolidations process is quite similar, if not the exact same. Is that for the planning process, there may be some differing views on the landing pages, given that there may be differing cards or clusters. But for all intents and purposes, the look and feel, the usability of the actual applications is very common. It also includes a great deal of functionality or features that have been ported from HFM into FCC, in that being able to leverage the journals module, using data forms for data submissions or data review, are all core features of FCC. The application also includes robust intercompany eliminations with some improvements in intercompany reporting. It also includes that same minority interest definition and equity pickup model that existed on-prem, with a great depth of improvements from a functionality perspective. The application also includes a number of pre-built features that, from an HFM perspective, were literal customizations, that including the actual cash flows model existing within the application, being able to manage multi-gap definitions, in that in its core definition within FCC, we're able to fashion local gap definitions in two different fashions. We're able to submit those local gap adjustments or evaluations into the application, or we can actually have the FCC calculate those based on our data integration model. The application also includes SmartView, which has been widely regarded as the principal or prime reporting solution for these consolidation applications. So again, that functionality does still exist with some improvements based on the differing context-sensitive ribbons that are true to FCC and the differing FCC components, and as well as the FCC submodules. Speaking of submodules, for those on-prem who are actually leveraging the closed manager, or maybe even leveraging the supplemental data manager modules or applications on-prem, those have been ported into FCC, in that those actual components, with a zero cost component for actually leveraging those, they're simply, from a supplemental data perspective, a feature enablement. And Task Manager is a core component of FCC that is usable across the entire Oracle EPM Cloud space. Speaking more specifically to Task Manager and Supplemental Data, as we mentioned, Task Manager, as it was formerly known as Closed Manager on-prem, is our means for managing and monitoring tasks from a schedule perspective in the application. The greatest win, when we're talking about this actual application, it does span across all of the EPM applications, as well as being able to interact with non-EPM applications. And supplemental data, again, is used for that granular level of detail that may extend the usability of FCC to maybe compress the need or maybe mitigate the need to extend the applications and metadata for more granular levels of content, in that we can integrate roll forwards of that level of granular detail into the application without having to layer in that level of depth into our application's metadata. Task Manager can also be deployed as a standalone application. And again, at the current moment, Task Manager is a FCC specific submodule, but as I mentioned, also has the ability to connect across all of the EPM cloud applications. Data management is the extract, transform, and load, or ETL solution that comes with FCC, in that there is not a requirement to purchase the FDME software or have to manage the actual software on a server. In that data management in its current fashion is more than capable of managing the integration models into the FCC application. And that data management not only has the ability to connect to different ERPs, it also can be used for integrations across the EPM applications, as well as having feature and functionality definitions to allow for drilling through to our source systems, as well as being able to be used with the EPM Automate utility for automating different integration models in the applications. Now, also in concert with data management, or the new SUI view of integrations, the EPM integration agent, which works within the data exchange model within FCC, is the amended model for establishing direct connections to virtually any data source or any EPM, in that there are pre-built definitions for exporting or extracting data from a number of general ledger systems, as well as having the wherewithal to be able to create custom or differing queries using SQL to be able to fashion a model of the actual or the more appropriate data sets that we'd like to integrate into our FCC application. The application also comes with differing models or modes for being able to track or manage how data is integrated into the application. As I mentioned earlier, there are also pre-built queries for being able to directly connect and integrate data from Oracle EBS and from PeoplesSoft GL, with functionality to be able to manage both Python and GUI language for our scripting definitions. Just a bit of a moment to also amplify some of the benefits for having this common EPM platform. As I mentioned earlier, look and feel is primarily the same, if not very similar, to other cloud-based applications or business processes. For those who have a desire to have the more recent releases of features and functionalities, the applications are updated on a monthly basis, in that on the first and third Fridays of each month, the test and the production instances are upgraded respectively, and that as there is a need to move forward with new features and functionalities, those are readily available to our user community. Also, from a deployment perspective, we're able to reduce the cost of training and support in the commonality of these applications. And also from an implementation perspective, given the robust feature set or pre-built definitions in these applications, the ability to quickly deploy these types of applications is a reality, given that the pure volume of customizations is mitigated or reduced because of the volumes of pre-built definitions in these applications. Now to speak to the elephant that may be in the room for some of those who have heard differing things regarding FCC's performance. We are so frighteningly impressed with how quickly the Oracle product development team has focused on those process improvements that we spoke to earlier. Literally from an Interroll perspective and even from an Oracle perspective, we've seen great improvements in how the application performs from a consolidations perspective and even from a translations perspective, in that if we gauge the actual improvements to consolidation times and translation times, we found that we've had somewhere between 30 and 40% improvements or reductions, better yet, in the durations of consolidation times for these applications, as well as being able to have much more concise translation process runs, as far as being able to make those processes run much more efficiently. And that, in large part, is performed or defined because of the back end application being S-based, leveraging the hybrid cube definitions, which also employ extended dimensionality for extending those applications to have 4 custom dimensions. Also, we're speaking to some additional improvements within applications. As of the most recent release, the 2008 release, they've actually added some additional improvements from a processing perspective to have focused consolidations on periodic data, which allows the application to perform even better, or be able to perform those consolidations in a much more rapid fashion than we've seen before. When we speak to feature comparisons between HFM and FCC, you'll find that these applications, as we mentioned earlier, we achieved parity back in 2018. The literal functionality definitions and feature definitions between these two applications are literally on par. There are very, very few, if any, I can think of one at the moment, feature definition that is not available for FCC that is currently available for HFM. So literally from an eliminations perspective, ownership management, being able to create custom calculations, custom translations, equity pickup, those are all latent pre-built feature definitions in the application. We're also able to extend FCC by creating custom insertion rules or configurable rules in the application to, again, further extend the actual application's use case. But again, there are no, or let me I'll walk that back. I can think of one feature set that is not available within FCC that is for HFM, that is not a current roadmap item. Also to note on this page, there's a reference to FCC not having phase emissions. That is on the near-term roadmap for Oracle to enable phase emissions if you're actively leveraging phase emissions in your integration models into HFM. As we continue on our feature set comparison between HFM and FCC, here is the one feature definition that is not currently available for FCC that is available for HFM. And the only reason that it is not on the near-term roadmap is that the ability to leverage journals within SmartView has not been widely adopted across the applications or the global application use case of HFM. Well, from my perspective, a number of our clients at Interroll have actively leveraged the journal's functionality within SmartView against HFM. So we anxiously await that moment when that feature is available to us. But again, that is the one that I spoke of earlier, the one feature definition that is not available or that I'm not aware of being on the immediate roadmap for, again, having that same level of feature functionality definition between HFM and FCC. We'll note that metadata management is a little bit different between FCC and HFM in that there's some additional options for managing metadata. Also want to make sure that we highlight that the intercompany management reporting is greatly improved between HFM and FCC, and our ability to be able to manage application migrations or copying applications is greatly improved as well. So depending on the version of HFM that you have, where we may be transitioning from having the copy app utility or being able to actively leverage consolidation administration with LCM, that model for migrating or copying applications has been greatly simplified in FCC versus on-prem. We also mentioned that the SmartView add-in or the MS Office add-in is still available. We also have, I did mention it earlier, but I do want to make sure I make note of it now. Dashboarding is an available premise for FCC that I don't recall how widely adopted the Oracle Financial Management Analytics or OFMA was adopted on-prem. But again, the ability to be able to produce these production-ready, highly visual dashboards for executive review. That is a core feature definition of FCC. Also, from a security perspective, the security model for FCC is greatly simplified in that the number of role definitions for FCC is greatly improved apart from that on-prem, in that we are able to actively leverage the security model from the identity domain feature of FCC, and we're able to manage differing groups. We're also able to, as is the case for HFM, we're actually able to manage dimensional security as well. So the need to manage access control or what have you are still comparable feature definitions within FCC in comparison to HFM, just to make certain for those who do actively leverage dimensional security, given their different premises for deploying the application and the visibility of the actual content in the application. That specific feature definition has been enabled within FCC, and for all intents and purposes has always been available within FCC. For those who are wondering if their FM application is really FCC ready, the good folks at Interroll Consulting Partners can help you in that evaluation, in that we've actually performed multiple readiness tests or assessments for our prospective clients, in that we reviewed their applications, more specifically their applications metadata, their applications custom calculations, just to confirm the fashion that we can elect to transition that logic into the application, whether that being using out-of-the-box functionality or pre-built rules, or using or deploying the calculation managers to develop insertion rules. One thing to also note from a lessons learned perspective, way back in 2016, is that from an FM perspective, there is no reality of member naming conventions that require uniqueness. That is a definite consideration, given that FCC has an S-based backend. And one of the initial efforts that we employ with our clients is to ensure that we're all mindful from a pure member naming perspective, that we're mindful of naming conventions to make sure we can address that, to prevent that from being an issue down the line as far as deploying applications. Also, our friends at Oracle have the HFM application analysis program that allows prospective clients to be able to stage their HFM application in the cloud. And again, Interroll can help with this and all other things relating to migrating from on-prem applications to the cloud. And that our friends at Oracle can again stage your applications in the cloud. They can review the actual applications, metadata, and rules that we spoke to earlier from an Interroll perspective. And they can also turn this around in about a week in that particular analysis. We're able to, or they're able, better yet, to speak to some potential problems, some areas of focus as far as being able to address some application concerns, as well as being able to walk prospective clients through what their application would look like in the cloud, as well as addressing some concerns or questions that might be related to performance or how long will my consolidations take in the cloud. Those are all areas of focus in both Interroll's technical assessments or virtual assessments of applications, or actual EPM application spaces, as well as leveraging Oracle's HFM application analysis program as well. Now, again, as I mentioned, as a byproduct of the Interroll technical assessments or the Oracle application readiness review, there are a number of questions that come from those sessions that we may pose to our clients, and our clients in most cases pose to us as well. How many applications exist in your environments? Do you have multiple HFM applications that we'll have to determine how we'll leverage those applications in the cloud? What are our volumes of members in our dimensions, whether it be in our custom dimensions, the account dimension, or the entity dimension? Also, how do you want to handle historical data? That becomes one of the more vexing concerns. I'm going to presume for almost all consulting partners, what is the volume of historical data that will transition from on-prem to the cloud? Do we want to actually stage that data set within FCC? Do we want to have maybe some differing repository for that historical data that we can call upon subsequently? Those are all the types of questions that we pose to our clients and that we hear from our clients as well. And then lastly, What will we do with our rules? Do we have to recreate all of our rules? The quite answer to that one, or the simple answer to that one is no. You don't have to recreate all of your rules because, again, a great deal of great depth of your custom rules within HFM are pre-built definitions within FCC. So again, we'll step back and take a logical view of what rule definitions are required to be ported into FCC, and then we will speak to our options for how we'll handle calculations within FCC, be it via insertion rules or maybe even leveraging memory formulas for addressing some of those consolidation rules or calculations that you have in HFM. Also, from an FCC perspective, there is a premise of having governors that are defined for optimizing the application's performance. Now, we in concert with Oracle can actually work with product development to address some of these governors to be able to maybe extend those based on the volume of content in your application. So again, for those applications that might have more than 5,000 entities, we can actually extend the governors there to, again, address performance, to make sure that it's performing optimally given that volume of members, as well as the volume of members that might exist within our custom dimensions, and also extend some of the application governors to address those. And then for those few applications, and I presume those applications that are performing multiple business processes, again, from an HFM perspective, that might have more than 50, yes, I said 50 scenarios. I'm thinking there may be a different or a better purpose-built cloud business process to actually help in that vein. Next, we'll transition to why you don't want a click-the-button migration solution. Again, when we speak to migration solutions, we actually think of these in different fashions. There's a lift and shift model where there may be some phantasmal belief that I can take my FM application and put the exact same application in FCC. Then there's a different idiom or thought process as it relates to application migrations, which is no more than a transformation. Now, again, from a transformation perspective, we like to often refer to this as move and improve. We're actually taking the current consolidations model, stepping back, having some real world conversations, or hard conversations in some cases, determine what should be moved to the cloud, and then acting upon those realizations. When we talk about that easy button, or that one-click migration, as I mentioned earlier, this is the opportunity when we're considering migrating from HFM to FCC to step back and to review our consolidation process. Also, it's a very optimal time to review what reporting shall look like from this new application. Because again, our reality is in most HFM worlds, reporting has been fairly static and unfortunately in some cases may have grown stale in that reporting has not evolved over time to have differing views. Or from a cloud perspective, given the advent of constant or the applications constantly evolving on a monthly basis and there being new feature set enablements each month, reporting can actively change in the applications on a much more constant basis from an improvement perspective than would have been the case on-prem. So again, the greatest reality when talking about this phantasmal easy button migration from FM to FCC, we often advocate for stepping back to simply review the actual consolidation processes and how the application should be optimally designed. Also, from a customizations perspective, as we have mentioned, and I am trying not to be recording, but our reality is the deployment of FCC is much simpler than that for HFM, given the volume of pre-built feature functionality definitions in the application. From a rules perspective, again, there is a high likelihood that the volume of rules will be greatly decreased in transitioning from HFM to FCC. And in our reality, at Intro at least, I can even think of probably 15, 20, maybe even 30% of our implementations when we're migrating from HFM to FCC. Personally speaking, on a number of my implementations, we've been able to step back and review the actual consolidation process. And you may not believe this, but it's the actual truth. we've been able to transition or migrate HFM applications with a great deal of custom VB scripting or rules to transition those applications into FCC with literally zero, no, none insertion rules or configurable calculations within FCC given the volume of pre-built functionality. Now, we were using, in some cases, member formers for some of the key performance indicators or those types of metric calculations. But again, we've been in a number of situations able to transition applications on-prem to the cloud with literally no coding and no scripting. Not always the case, depending on the volume of customization of complexity and the FM applications based on use cases. But again, we have a number of options for simplifying the applications and for making the administration process of FCC much more simple and much more business focused than may have been the case for HFM. Also, from a reporting perspective, as we mentioned, this is the perfect time to step back to review what that reporting model should entail, in that in a number of cases when we're looking at or reviewing our HFM client applications that are being transitioned to the cloud, their reporting repositories are bloated with reports that are either redundant, meaning they actually have the exact same content with a different point of view, or they just have reports that aren't used. They haven't been used in quite some time. So this is the perfect opportunity to review what reporting shall look like, and even consider maybe transitioning some reporting from being purely ad hoc reports, because in a number of cases we find that clients are using SmartView as the quote-unquote reporting solution for productionalized reports, and even maybe a need to maybe address some of the core definitions or fashions that reports that have been created within the Financial Reporting Studio might be crafted in that, given that we're working in the enterprise cloud world, we're now able to leverage the narrative reporting solution to be able to bring all things reporting together. And that on-prem, there are a number of different reporting options that were required to be able to bring all reporting together. Well, conversely, from a cloud perspective, we can leverage narrative reporting as a single solution for developing report packages or what have you against the EPM and in some cases, BI applications. Now, when we speak to narrative reporting, as we mentioned, it is the go-forward reporting solution for EPM applications. In that, it includes a number of different modules for reporting. First, we'll speak to narrative reporting, which again is much more Excel-based. We're able to leverage stocklets or what have you for producing report packages. Then there's management reporting, which is highly comparable with a great deal of improvement to feature and functionality definitions within the financial reporting web or Prem Studio, and that the management reporting option allows us to connect to multiple EPM solutions and not simply be leveraged or managed or mandated, better yet, to simply connecting reporting against a single data solution or target application for reporting. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we are not simply managed or maintained to reporting from EPM applications. We can also report against different BI applications. And also, there is the XBRL functionality within this management option, which again was an on-prem standalone solution that is now part of narrative reporting that allows us to be able to manage the taxonomy design, as well as being able to tag different members for XBRL reporting. And also, given some of our use cases of the narrative reporting applications, we've also been able to transition or migrate the on-prem disclosure management functionality to the cloud quite seamlessly. Now, with respect to management reporting, again, I know that the greatest, or one of the greatest areas of focus for these types of applications is reporting or outputs from the application. As I mentioned, management reporting is the replacement for the Financial Reporting Studio, whether it be web or on-prem, in that there are comparable definitions for how the actual reports can be deployed We can again span across multiple event applications, and we're also able to maybe in some cases leverage some of the on-prem reporting definitions, those DES files, maybe use those in some fashions or in some cases as an opportunity, as a starting point maybe to transition some of those on-prem reports into the cloud. And in the off cases or the off chance that those on-prem reports will be the go-forward reporting solution, we can use some of those reporting definitions on-prem to transition those into managed reporting for using or better for use in the cloud or against our FCC applications. Next, we're going to transition to the fun part. Speaking to moving from HFM to FCC, again, this is going to be much more in tune with feature set comparisons between HFM and FCC, just to make sure we're bringing this full circle. Those who are actively using HFM in comparison to what's offered within FCC. When we speak to our implementation model, it is largely defined by the Interrail engagement methodology, in that in a number of cases, as we mentioned earlier, we quite often perform assessments, deliver proofs of concept. That in most cases is our starting point, just to gain that win, to build some form of understanding of how the FM application will behave, look, and feel in the cloud. We then transition to a much more in-depth ideation phase, where we're actually going through substantive conversations with differing groups within that are consuming data and using the different applications or HFM specifically. We then transition to the actual build phase, where we're actually building out the application components, whether that be integrations of data, financial reporting, what have you. And then we transition to the most amazing component of the life cycle of an implementation, the testing phase, where we're going through data validation of historical data and any form of integration testing, what have you, as a means of standing up or staging the new application in hopes, fingers crossed, of being able to replicate historical reporting in HFM. And then lastly, as a means of, again, deploying the application and getting global adoption across the enterprise, we quite often have multiple parallel cycles just to replicate or show how we can compare the actual feature definitions or the use cases of HFM and FCC on a parallel basis, just to make certain that any use cases of HFM would have been included and deliver a solution of FCC to make sure that there aren't any gaps or there are any areas of focus that may have been missed throughout the life cycle of implementation. We also mentioned again that there are some utilities that can be used. Again, there is no easy button, but there are some utilities that can be used as a means of fast tracking that migration from HFM to FCC. The EPM Cloud Migration Accelerator is one of those utilities, in that we can stage some of the artifacts from HFM in this particular utility as a means of a starting point for designing metadata, maybe metadata definitions, maybe being able to use this tool to review member name uniqueness to ensure that as you're moving forward or moving towards migrating applications, metadata, or application artifacts, we've taken a deep dive view of the application's content just to ensure that we're not going to venture down any pitfalls of using that type of this type of utility to address those concerns. Now, when we talk about the FCC applications, features, and definitions, this is a real look and feel of what the applications, feature definitions or options are based upon. In that, we have the ability to determine the form or fashion of balance sheet that we want to deploy. And again, we have multiple options, given that there are 3 different looks and feel for developing a balance sheet. Within the account dimension, there's traditional, which is a more involved view, which includes far more pre-built member definitions in the application. There's a net asset approach. And then lastly, there's the basic, which is a slimmed down view that carves out some of the pre-built definitions and only includes those pertinent feature definitions or enablements that are required for being able to more or less customize what the application's account dimension of functionality is based upon for much more concise reporting to remove some of the unnecessary member definitions that might be prevalent in traditional balance sheet approach. We're also able to enable an application for cash flows reporting if that's selected based on an indirect method. We're also able to turn on or off or enable the multi-GAAP functionality for being able to produce reporting for local GAAP, with also, as I mentioned earlier, an option to determine how the adjustments will be derived, whether it be by actually manually submitting those adjustments or allowing the application to calculate those adjustments for us. Also, we're actually able to define how the currency translation adjustment will be calculated or derived on either balance sheet or income statement basis, as well as being able to define the corresponding custom dimensions that are available within FCC. And again, as you may refer to this particular slide, at the current moment, we can create up to 4 custom dimensions, being mindful that if the multi-GAAP feature is enabled, then that would consume one of the 4 custom dimensions. We're also, as is the case on-prem, able to enable multiple modules, the journals module and an intercompany module. We can enable both of those in the FCC application. Again, once we elect to enable intercompany data, again, there are differing dimensions and dimensional members that come in concert with that enablement. But again, we do have the ability to turn those features on in the cloud, as is the case from a modules perspective on-prem. The application also comes with a great deal of ratio calculations that are most commonly used on-prem. I think that there's somewhere between 13 and 17 pre-built calculations or ratios that come with the application. And again, these ratio calculations can be enabled within our application. We also have the wherewithal to enable the ownership management module for tracking monetary interest or equity pickup in the application, and also being able to leverage the equity pickup methods I mentioned, as well as partner eliminations. And then lastly, we can enable differing features to extend and add some additional members in our data source dimension for different components there for reporting, for segregating data. And then lastly, as far as our feature definitions or enablements, we're able to turn on the supplemental data module for including additional member in our data source dimension and leveraging that supplemental data feature or sub module for integrating that granular data set into FCC. Also, from a feature enablement perspective, as I mentioned, after the applications have been created, we're also able to turn on feature sets as they are deployed in the cloud. This is a glaring example of that specific idiom in that. In the original creation of this particular application, the additional consolidation member feature or options was not available then. But since then, in one of the more later releases of FCC, there have been 3 additional members that have been added to the application's consolidation dimension, which perfectly aligns FCC with the value dimension of HFM, and that we're able to submit adjustments and different inputs at differing levels of the consolidation dimension within FCC. Now, we speak to the applications from a dimensional comparison perspective. Those standard dimensions that were available and prevalent within HFM are still available and prevalent within FCC, given that the scenario, year period, or years and period dimensions are common across applications, as are the entity account and intercompany partner. And again, the intercompany partner definition is the exact same in the cloud as it is on-prem. It's simply a feature enablement on an entity to include that specific member in our intercompany dimension with a prefix to ensure member naming uniqueness in FCC. The biggest probably differentiator between FCC and HFM, it would be that the value dimension has been maybe expanded or blown into 2 separate dimensions within FCC, given that the consolidation dimension is a very close similarity, has a very close similarity to the value dimension in HFM. And also, depending on the feature enablement in your application, if we're talking about a multi-currency application, the value dimension becomes 2 dimensions, consolidation and currency. But if we do not enable the application for multi-currency for FCC, that is, there is still a currency dimension. It is just not a viewable or visual dimension. It's just simply defined by that single reporting currency that we define in the application. So again, that would probably be one of the larger distinctions when we're talking about dimensionality between HFM and FCC, how the value dimension has been exported into 2 DIMs versus 1 for more concise reporting. The view dimension also is still prevalent within FCC, as was the case in HFM, along with the maximum of up to 4 custom dimensions. And again, our reality is on-prem, a number of the custom dimensions that we built are now standard dimensions within FCC, and that the data source dimension, which is what we use to segregate data based on different data source, is a standard dimension within FCC, as is the case for the movement dimension. And that, again, as we quite often created rules of logic within HFM to show how data moved on a periodic or different view basis of balance sheet accounts, that is a standard dimension within FCC, and is also used for deploying the cash flows model for cash flows reporting. And also, as we mentioned earlier, in some cases on-prem, we'd actually create a multi-GAAP dimension for storing the adjustments for local GAAP. Again, depending on the application's feature enablement, that would be a custom dimension within FCC. Here's a view of said consolidation dimension within FCC with highlights for those newly available additional consolidation dimension members. And that, again, from bottom to top, we have a very, very comparable look and feel of the consolidation dimension within FCC as it relates to the value dimension within HFM. And we'll expand upon this a bit more in the coming moments. Now, again, we're talking about those dimensions within FCC. Again, this is a view of the dimensions that come with the application, highlighting that, again, the currency dimension, if enabled, with multiple currency will be available for use, as will be the case for intercompany, and also will be the case for multi-GAAP if enabled in the application's creation. Now, we're talking about the entity dimension. Again, the entity dimension, again, is where we define the organizational structure of the application. Again, that could have differing looks and feels, whether it be based on true legal reporting, divisional reporting, regional reporting, what have you. But again, just as was the case on-prem, the entity dimension is the true consolidation dimension of the application, given that the other dimensions of the applications of this application that it naturally aggregate, where the actual entity dimension requires some form of process to generate a consolidation, be it consolidation or translation to be invoked. So again, the entity dimension, for all intents and purposes, there are very, very few differences where you speak to what that means from HFM to FCC. Probably the biggest differentiators might be some differing properties that are prevalent within, given that FCC has an S-based backend versus HFM's relational backend. From a dimensional perspective, also some key terminology that we quite often use when it relates to entities within the entity dimension would be if entities are base dimensions, they're dependent dimensions, our entity members or parent members. And again, this just basically speaks to our ability to integrate data for those base level entities at the bottom of the structure. Dependent entities may be entities that may be owned by some other entity. And again, at the very top of the house or top of our hierarchies, our parent entities include some form of dependence rolling up or reporting at that specific level of the actual hierarchy. From the account perspective, again, the account dimension, most cases is in large part very comparable to that between HFM and FCC. Again, we're talking about the literal breadth of pre-built definitions. This is where we actually come to that realization pretty quickly, and that there are a number of pre-built definitions for our account dimension, as well as differing member properties that are much more in line with an S-based backend. So again, this is where, again, we're talking about a common platform for those shops who have leveraged both an S-based and an HFM application. There's much more of a common use case as far as outline management or member management, given that in the cloud. both planning and the consolidation applications have very, very comparable outline definition from a use case perspective. Also, when we're talking about the use case of the account dimension, the application does also include the actual income statement being laden into the retained earnings section of the account dimension. And that on a comparative basis, most HFM applications had a balance sheet hierarchy and a separate income statement hierarchy with a corresponding calculation to calculate current year earnings, to bring that value into the balance sheet, and a corresponding translation to ensure that that current year earnings account was at the average or some corporate rate. Well, from an FCC perspective, that is all pre-built. That customization to have our video are set in a different fashion. That management or maintenance effort to manage two different hierarchies in two different places has been transitioned to a single structure that includes both balance sheet and income statement in a single structure. And it also includes the necessity to no longer have to craft those types of calculations to move the year-to-date net income to our current year earnings number on balance sheet. That is part of our structure. So again, there is no longer necessity, that level of customization in application for balance sheet reporting, or for being able to realize the views of the income statement in our account dimension. You'll also note that there are differing corresponding account types based on the accounts that we're leveraging, as well as differing default storage options and variance reporting based on the account type. One thing to also note that in most cases, we leverage a time balance of flow that allows us to be able to realize the different levels of reporting using our view dimension versus being managed to a single view and having to create customizations to be able to see our balance sheet data in differing views. So again, great depth of pre-built functionality that comes with an FCC as it relates to our account dimension and financial reporting. The moving dimension, as I mentioned, also would in most cases on-prem be a custom dimension that we have to build out. In most cases, we build it out to mimic or replicate cash flows reporting. Also, we have custom calculations to derive data on different views, whether it be periodic, quarter data, year-to-date basis. We'll converse it with an FCC. The moving dimension is a pre-built dimension that, again, in most cases, is used for deriving data value movements for balance sheet accounts. It's also defined or predefined for including content related to cash flows reporting. Also includes calculations for deriving opening and closing balances. With one of the more recent releases of new feature definitions, there is no longer a need to be able to define, whether it be by calculation or what have you, how accounts will be mapped to the corresponding moving dimension members or cash flows line items. We can simply leverage an out-of-the-box calculation used in concert with a simple member property definition that will associate a corresponding account, whether it be balance sheet or income statement, to a corresponding statement of cash flows line item. So again, that is a grand win for developers like myself, and that historically we had to create these as custom calculations. Well, now there is a pre-built calculation that simply requires that from a developer perspective, simply enabling differing features in the application to leverage or to realize the benefits of the calculate movements functionality that is pre-built within the application. The data source dimension, as we mentioned earlier, is again a DIM that we use on-prem for segregating or defining or tracking and tracing, to use different catchwords, where data would have derived. And that within FCC, again, this is a pre-built dimension in the application with pre-built members that we define, or in most cases we define where data lives, in that in most cases we're integrating data from using our ETL solution. We're integrating that data to the managed data member, so we'll know that that is true trial balance level of detail. We also have the ability to integrate different forms of data into different members, whether it be data input or maybe other data. We're also able to segregate any data sets or data components that would have been integrated using the supplemental data module as well as the journals module. We're actually able to define or to denote or journal members or journal values or submitted to the application. One thing to also note is that within data, so we need to extend this dimension to have additional levels or layers to note where data would have been traced from. We can actually layer those additional members into content. So we'll make certain that we'll dive into consolidation dimension to give a more accurate parallel to the value dimension within HFM. Now, again, from the bottom to the top, we'll again to speak to the different levels. At the very bottom of the consolidation dimension within FCC, there is the entity consolidation member, which is primarily applicable to parent entities in that it is a true consolidation member for rolling up data from the children up to their parent. We also, in most cases, for all members in the application, we submit data into the entity input member, which again is our submission point in the application. Again, one of the more recently released features was the enablement of the translated currency input, which allows us to create adjustments of journal entries and an input currency that differs from the default currency of an entity. So if I have a Canadian dollar entity and I actually want to submit a US dollar journal entry, I can actually leverage the consolidation dimension in concert with the data source dimension to integrate data in a differing currency than the default currency of that specific entity. So again, we leverage the translated currency input member for journals or for adjustments. Well, the entity total member, again, this is very, very common to what we see on-prem. This is no more than an aggregation of the entity input and the entity consolidation data up to the chain to the parent. The parent input level is a newly added feature in that we're able to submit data via data entry, whether it be in SmartView or what have you, to be able to submit data in the parent currency of an entity. So again, to use the case we spoke to earlier to a Canadian dollar entity, let's presume that it had a parent entity in US dollars. We're able to submit data in US dollars based on that parent-child combination or definition to be able to, again, not have to be simply mandated to submitting Canadian dollar data into the application. We can actually submit in US dollar or any differing parent currency based on the parent-child relationship of that said entity. The proportion and elimination levels are literally the same and for all intents and purposes for that in HFM, in that the proportionalized data is where we come to that realization at the proportion member based on the percentage of contribution for a member to its parent. And at the elimination level, this is again where the application stores elimination activities in the application. Again, that elimination path is no different from that within HFM, in that we simply enable a member property within the account dimension, associate a corresponding plug account, and from an entity perspective, we associate the corresponding member property to enable that entity for participating in intercompany eliminations. And as a byproduct of the consolidations process, the actual translations occur automatically in FCC as they did with HFM. The contribution level, again, is no more than an aggregation point to bring that proportionalized data and eliminated data up to a parent, as well as, again, a newly added member for data input. We're able to submit contribution levels of detail into the application, which, again, are post-proportionalized data for different fashions or different purposes for submitting data in a parent's currency. So, again, this is just a quick walkthrough of the consolidation dimension in FCC in comparison to the value dimension within HFM. Also, as we mentioned earlier, the intercompany dimension is, again, a feature enablement within FCC. Again, as I mentioned, once we enable the intercompany data feature within FCC, it then creates the intercompany dimension, which again is pre-populated by members based on a member property enablement. There is still consistency between HFM and FCC in that the fashion for adding members to the intercompany dimension is by member property enablement. This is not a dimension where we can add members, as is also the case for the consolidation dimension. We do not have the wherewithal to add new members into those dimensions other than by feature enablement, as we mentioned earlier. Also, when we're speaking to the intercompany module within FCC, as we mentioned earlier, and again, I'm trying my best to be redundant to make sure I crystallize the mere fact that HFM and FCC are so much alike that there really isn't a true difference from a parallel perspective in the applications. And that once we enable intercompany, we're then going to realize a new dimension. We'll then also realize new dimensional members in our consolidation dimension, that elimination member that we spoke to, and also within our data source dimension, that intercompany elimination member that we also spoke to as well. We're able to track and trace or segregate eliminations within our data source, as is also the case in our consolidation dimension. Now, as far as dimensional management, as far as comparison between HFM and FCC, fairly similar with some additional feature options in FCC that are not available for HFM, in that we can actively manage HFM metadata via client, EPMA, or flat file. The same is basically the case for FCC, in that we can manage metadata via the web. We can also import and export metadata files and from the application and import those back in, but we also have the ability to manage metadata within SmartView. Yes, I said SmartView. We can actively manage the member property, member inclusion within SmartView, as well as being able to subsequently refresh our database or push those metadata changes into application. So again, that is a great win for those administrators who have a high proclivity to using SmartView. We can actively leverage some metadata managed within SmartView in our applications on FCC. We're also able to leverage the data relationship management or DRM application, as well as enterprise data management or EDM for managing metadata on a much more rigorous basis that might also include some form of controls around the submissions of new members, what have you, for managing metadata for these applications. So again, the little deployment of management of metadata is fairly common across the two applications, with some additional feature options for FCC. From a data integration perspective, very common or comparable integration path for integrating data into FCC, and that we're still able to integrate data natively by file. So again, we can still import files, import data into FCC, as is the case for HFM. We're able to leverage an ETL solution, whether that be data management or financial data quality management in Consolidation, for integrating data into FCC. And again, from a data management perspective, we also can leverage the EPM integration agent for directly connecting to different ERPs. We're also able to leverage forms in that, depending on access level or role assignment within FCC, we're able to integrate data via a data form or even from SmartView. So again, those are much more role-based submission options, but again, we do have the same integration options in the cloud for FCC as is the case or was the case for HFM. I've been speaking to pre-built functionalities and pre-built definitions. Here's a view of our rules card that speaks to those rule definitions that we can launch from the web, as well as some additional options for those multi-currency applications for being able to compute rates, to push data from the rates cube or the database into the consolidation database. Again, these rules can be launched from the web. They can also be launched from within data forms. So again, if I have a data form for calculations or for running consolidations, I can also launch the consolidate, translate, force translate rule from my data form as well. I can also launch rules from SmartView. So again, once I establish my connection to the appropriate application, I can then make an election to kick off a rule or run a business rule. But one thing to note, just to call out to a feature definition that we spoke to just a second ago, we're actually able to manage metadata from SmartView as well. So here you're actually visualizing the differing dimensions that exist within this corresponding application, and we're able to actively manage that metadata from SmartView for each of those dimensions from the SmartView panel. Again, we speak to being able to, getting back on course, we speak to launching business rules. Once we again open the rules module within SmartView, we're actually again able to see those rules that are available to us, and then we can populate the corresponding runtime prompts for running said business rules. We speak to insertion rules again. The model for managing the rules within FCC is calculation manager base. Given that it gives us template definitions, we can also create scripting objects using the S-based scripting language, which is a bit of a difference from the scripting language for HFM, in that both applications, depending on the deployment model, if I'm an EPMA deployer for HFM, I can manage or leverage the calculation manager for my rule deployment. But again, the biggest differences between calculations between HFM and FCC are quite simply syntactically based, and that FCC syntax is based on an S-based scripting language versus HFM using Visual Basic as scripting language for rule development. Also, from an insertion rules perspective, we do have differing insertion points for our differing rules based on the pre-built definitions, in that we can produce custom insertion rules for both data sets at the local currency level. We can create calculations on a translated basis, and even create calculations post-translation on a consolidated basis, which is a great segue into being able to develop configurable calculations. And some of the more prevalent examples of configurable calculations might be if there might be a need to have some custom elimination model or some custom or non-standard elimination path, we can actually craft configurable calculations to define those configurable elimination models that might be non-standard. Also, from an ownership management perspective, the look and feel very comparable between HFM and FCC, and that we're actively able to manage the ownership from a form. We're able to view or visualize the ownership percentage, the consolidation method for the actual entities, as well as being able to, as would have been the case on-prem, allow for the application to automatically calculate the consolidation percentage and the minority interest percentage within the application based on our ownership percentage and or the consolidation method selected. Next, we transition to journals. And again, we're trying to make sure that we highlight those most commonly used areas of feature definitions within HFM that are within FCC. We'll next transition to journals. Again, the literal monicum for managing journals is simply the same, in that we, again, from a journals perspective, we manage periods by opening and closing periods. We then transition to being able to manage our journals. And again, we have a differing interface view of how the journals are managed, in that each journal has a unique ID that's associated with each individual journal as far as a number. Labeling conventions are very comparable as far as reserved characters that can or cannot be used in our journal names. We're also able to reference the status and the currency of corresponding journal entries within our managed journals view within FCC. Also, from a point of view perspective, we're able to create journals based on a very comparable view, based on the scenario year period. But we're also able to, in FCC, able to extend our fashion for deploying journals, in that we're able to create journal entries within FCC, both the periodic and on a year-to-date basis. Now we speak to the literal feature set definitions with FCC, again, how we make distinctions between HFM functionality and FCC functionality. We speak to being able to deploy year-to-date journals. We now have two additional options for deploying journals on a year-to-date basis. Those options are true year-to-date journals, and there is also an option for creating journal-to-date journals. The biggest difference between the year-to-date journals and the journal-to-date journals is simply that journals that are created on a year-to-date basis quite simply reverse in a subsequent period. But if a journal is created in the last period of the year, it does not reverse into the first period of the subsequent year. Or conversely, the journal-to-date option gives you the exact same feature definitions as would have been the case for year-to-date journals. The biggest differentiator for journal-to-date journals is simply that if I create a journal in the last period of a fiscal year, it will reverse in the first period of the subsequent year. So again, these feature set definitions are only available within FCC and not in HFM. So again, great wins for us from a developer's perspective for being able to leverage out-of-the-box functionality that exists within FCC and unfortunately not within HFM. Also, from a journal's perspective, here's a view of the actual journal's window in that we can actually actively view the journal in its current state, and we can actually view the journal's content based on member selections and amounts. Again, very comparable look and feel to what we saw in HFM, with in the lower quadrant of the actual journal view, corresponding debit and credit valuations, as well as the corresponding variance definition for managing balanced journal entries in FCC. FCC also includes dashboarding. Again, that is far more robust than anything that you've ever seen on-prem for consolidations applications, in that we can actively leverage forms and have differing dashboarding views of content. Very easy to deploy dashboarding options or feature definitions from FCC that are highly adopted in most of our FCC implementations for giving that high level views of data for executive level reviews of the performance of the operations on differing views or different bases for reporting. The application also includes approvals, and again, this is in large part comparable to process management on-prem, in that there is a modicum of an approval unit versus a processing unit on-prem. Again, the little fashion for sharing the responsibility of approving financial data is comparable, with a little bit of a different look and feel in FCC as far as being able to manage the approvals process and or the locking or unlocking of periods, in that we can actually use the manage approvals functionality for locking periods, as is the case on-prem, in a different fashion. In conclusion, and thank you again for hanging with me. I know I may have gone a few minutes over, but I've been having way too much fun talking through what Consolidation's offers in the cloud versus on-prem. What have we discussed today? We discussed two critical decision points. Why should you move from HFM to FCC? And then why you don't want a click-the-button migration solution or some easy migration option. We then transitioned to a feature and functionality review or comparison between HFM, and that reviewed how to move from HFM to FCC. In closing, as far as a few upcoming webcasts that we'll be hosting, next week on August the 19th, we'll be hosting how to migrate from EDM, from EPMA or DRM. Similar to this actual session where we talked to migrating from HFM to FCC, we will transition to speaking to migrating from EPMA or DRM to EDM. On August the 20th, we'll have our Healthcare Payer Virtual Conference. And on August 26th, we'll also have the future of reporting and analysis. We'll speak to the emergence of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And also on August 26th, we'll also be hosting the EPM Spotlight on Financial Consolidations, which is will be another session where I and a few folks from my practice will expand upon some of the points that I've attempted to address, speaking to feature and functionality definitions for FCC in a much more granular basis to make sure that we can further expand upon the benefits of FCC. Also, from an Interroll perspective, we're very, very excited about our strategic assessment practice, and that we offer a 3-day virtual strategic assessment. And in that 3-day virtual assessment, we'll cover a number of different topics, and that will review the current state of business, whether it be from a planning, consolidation, or reporting process, as well as being able to speak to or maybe offer a product roadmap for the use case of our EPM applications, and maybe some next steps in improving how we'll leverage those business processes going forward. And also, we're huge champions of speaking to how change management is definitely a win in the actual implementation and the ongoing usability of our EPM applications. For more information on Interroll's virtual strategic assessments, that can be accessed at epm.bi DSA. And we're really excited about the recently announced Hyperion Solutions Conference, in that for many of you who may remember the old Hyperion Solutions conferences, Interrail is bringing it back. We're actually calling on speakers and attendees, whether that be customers, software vendors, even consulting partners from other practices or from different partners. We want you. We'd love to have you guys participate in our upcoming Solutions Conference. Again, this conference will be held virtually, October 19th through 22nd. Again, we're actively soliciting the assistance or participation from differing attendees and our speakers. And again, information regarding the Hyperion Solutions 2020 conference can be obtained at epm.bi/Hyperion. And also remember, those who are desiring to speak, the abstract submission deadline is Friday, August 21st. With that, I bid you a fond adieu. But again, thank you so much for sitting with me today as we discuss how easy it is to migrate from HFM to FCC. Again, Terrence Walker, Neuro Consulting Partners, thanking you for your time. Have a great day.